In part 2 of the osteology, I have covered all the bones of the upper limb, including the shoulder girdle, then the arm bones, forearm bones, then the wrist bones, and also I have covered about the muscle attachment aspect also, and also the surface anatomy of the bones. I hope this will be helpful for the students who are the beginners in medical field. So let's start with the session now. In total, we have around 206 bones in the body. We have around 206 bones in the body. So we divide this whole skeleton into the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. Okay. So in axial skeleton, we will study about the skulls, vertebral column, and the thoracic cage alone. Then in the appendicular skeleton, we will study about the remaining bones of, the bones of the upper limb and the bones of the lower limb. The upper limb, that is the pectoral girdle, and the other bones. Pectoral girdle means it consists of three bones like the scapula, the clavicle, and the humerus. Likewise, in the lower limb, we study about the pelvic girdle and the lower limb. So pelvic girdle means it consists of three bones and one femur, that is the ilium, ischium, and the pubis. We will see all the bones in detail. So coming to this appendicular skeleton, let's start with the pectoral girdle bones. What you see here is a complete skeletal system of the human body. Okay, yesterday we have discussed about the presence of cartilages in all the end bones. These are all the articulating cartilages, hyaline articular cartilages in all the articulating bone areas. Apart from this, you also have the fibrocartilaginous discs in between this vertebral column, then in between these two pubic bones. Okay, so we discussed about the cartilage yesterday, but we will discuss more in detail when we study about the arthrology, that is the study of joints, right? So coming to this bone, before starting this bones of the upper limb, I would like to show you some landmarks. Okay, so what you see here is the red color and the blue color markings on the bones. The red color and the blue color markings on the bone. Okay, so if you see here, this red color, okay, let me select only this appendicular skeleton. Okay, these are the appendicular skeleton that I have selected for you. So when you see the red color and the blue color, the red color, it denotes the origin of a muscle. Okay, take for example, I will take one subscapularis muscle. Okay, see here, when you see this is the subscapularis muscle. You see, this is the origin zone of the subscapularis muscle. So always the origin zone of a muscle will be noted as a red color, and the insertion zone, that is the insertion point where the muscle comes and inserts, and this is where the movement is taking place. If this muscle contracts, the humerus will turn medially, will have medial rotation. So this point is noted in blue color. So this is what you have to understand about the color codings on the muscles and the bones. Okay, so if you look at this place, you can see this is the subscapularis origin zone. You can see it's a red in color. So you have the red color zone, that is subscapularis muscle origin point, and and this is the insertion point of the subscapularis muscle, which is noted in blue color. Likewise, in the bone, if you see all the place, for example, all these areas has the pectoralis major origin, okay, and it is inserting here, and it is inserting in this place in the okay. So likewise, this is what you have to understand. This is the origin point of the serratus anterior muscle, okay, but it is inserting in the humerus. So likewise, you have to know, understand that the red color shows the origin point of a muscle and blue color shows the insertion point of a muscle. Okay, blue color shows the insertion point of a muscle. So this is what you have to understand about the color codings on the skeleton. This is what you have to understand about the color codings on the skeleton. Now coming to the muscles of, bones of the upper limb. So as I told you, in the upper limb you have, it starts with the clavicle, scapula and the remaining bones. Okay, so this is the sternum bone in the anterior aspect of the chest. Okay, and sternum has three parts. That's the manubrium part, body of the sternum and the xiphoid process. Okay, and this is the clavicle bone. It's also called as a collar bone, and it is said to be the long bone in the horizontal plane. Okay, in this transverse direction, this bone is said to be the longest bone. This bone is said to be the longest bone. This bone is said to be the longest bone. Okay, so when you see in this place, this clavicle, I would like to show it separately. This is the left clavicle and the right clavicle is on the other side. So what you see here is, this is medial side and this is lateral side. Okay, that is, this is towards the midline and this is away from the midline. Okay, so the medial side, medial end is called as a sternal end. This end is called as sternal end, and the lateral end is called as the acromial end. Lateral end is called as the acromial end of the scapula, the clavicle. Okay, so if you look at the medial end, it is like some sort of quadrangular structure. The medial articulating surface is some sort of a quadrangular structure, whereas the lateral end is somewhat flat structure. It's somewhat flat in nature, and this lateral end is articulating with the acromion process of the scapula, forming the acromioclavicular joint, and this medial end is articulating with the manubrium part of the sternum. So that's why it's called as sternoclavicular joint. That is, it's called as sternoclavicular joint. It is called as a sternoclavicular joint. So what you can see here is, when we discuss about the joints, we will discuss about the articulating disc that is present between this bone. Now let's focus only on the bones. Okay, so the medial 2/3 is curved anteriorly. The medial 2/3 is curved anteriorly, whereas the lateral 1/3 is curved posteriorly. Okay, this is a superior aspect and this is the inferior aspect, and in the inferior aspect there is a small projection. Is called as conoid tubercle. This part is called as a conoid tubercle. Okay, so these are various names. And why this is curved anteriorly? Because if you look at this neurovascular structure, okay, the subclavian artery and the brachial plexus is passing in the posterior aspect of the clavicle. That is why this medial 2/3 of the clavicle is curved anteriorly. Okay, so likewise, this is the only bone that is transmitting the body weight of the upper limb towards the midline of the body. That is, when you abduct this arm, abduct this arm, when you abduct this arm, okay, that what happens, so for example, when you fall with the outstretched hand, okay, you support your hand and fall down, what happens that time, this scapula humerus comes and hits the glenoid fossa of the scapula, then this scapula transmits the weight through the acromion process towards the clavicle, and thereby the weight is transferred to the midline of the body. Okay, that is why the fracture of clavicle is common when there is a fall with the outstretched hand. When there is a fall with the outstretched hand. Okay, so if you look at the muscle attachment to the clavicle, if you look at the muscle attachment to the clavicle, this origin point is the pectoralis major. This origin point is the pectoralis major. Okay, you see the pectoralis major is touching the sternum as well as the clavicle, okay. Then this origin point is a deltoid muscle. The anterior fiber of deltoid is touching the lateral 1/3 curve of the clavicle, and that's why, okay, and okay, so likewise in the here you have the origin point of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. This is the sternal, this is a clavicle part, and this is the sternal part, and the mastoid part in the neck. Okay, so these are some of the muscles that is originating and inserting on the clavicle bone. It's originating and inserting on the clavicle bone. Okay, so know that there are other specialties for clavicle. This is the first bone to be ossified, to be formed in the intrauterine life, and it is the it is the longest bone in the horizontal plane, and it has 2 ossification centers. Okay, and it is the first bone of the membranous ossification. It is formed from the membranes. Okay, these are some of the specialities of the this clavicle, and moreover, okay, now let's go to the next bone, that is the scapula. I will remove both the bone, this clavicle and the scapula. Okay, so if you look at the scapula, this scapula is an example of a flat bone. Okay, and this is the anterior view of the scapula, and this is a posterior view of the scapula. Okay, and this is the medial border. This is the inferior angle of the scapula, and this is the lateral border of the scapula. Okay, so now if you look at there are 3 fossas. That is, fossa means pit-like structure. So you see this anterior pit is called as subscapularis fossa. Likewise, when you turn the scapula to posterior side, in this area you have the supraspinatus fossa, and this pit is called as the infraspinatus fossa. Okay, so this supraspinatus and the infraspinatus fossa is formed by a scapular spine. Okay, this part is called as a scapular spine. This spine extends laterally and forms the acromion process. This projection is called as the acromion process. Okay, so, and in the let's coming back to the anterior view. In the anterior view, there is a small projection. Okay, this projection is called as the coracoid process. the coracoid process. Okay, now in the superior border you can see a pit-like structure. You can see a pit-like structure. This notch is called as the suprascapular notch. This notch is called as suprascapular notch because in this the suprascapular artery and the suprascapular nerve is passing. The suprascapular artery and the suprascapular, this is the suprascapular nerve and the suprascapular artery is passing. This is the suprascapular artery. Okay, that's why that notch is present. The suprascapular notch is present. Okay, and this notch is called as greater scapular notch. Okay, if you look at this nerve, they are passing through this greater scapular notch and it is supplying this infraspinatus muscle. It is supplying this infraspinatus muscle. Okay, coming to anatomical position, this is anatomical position. This is anatomical position. And when you look at the lateral aspect of the scapula, when you look at the lateral aspect of the scapula, this pit is called as a glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa. Okay, this pit is called as the glenoid fossa, and this border of the glenoid fossa is called as the glenoid labrum, where you have thick articulating hyaline articulating cartilage. This is called as the glenoid labrum. Okay, so these are some of the parts of the scapula. Let me review again: the coracoid process, the acromion process, the glenoid fossa, the glenoid labrum, the subscapularis fossa, supraspinatus fossa, infraspinatus fossa. Okay, so these are some of the fossa parts of the scapula. Okay, now when you look at the origin and insertion of the scapular muscles, when you look at the muscles of the scapula, okay, here you see in the subscapularis fossa, the subscapularis muscle is originating and is coming to the upper end of the humerus. Likewise, in the supraspinatus fossa, the supraspinatus muscle originates and goes to the upper end of the humerus. Okay. In the infraspinatus fossa, the infraspinatus muscle originates and it goes to the upper end of the humerus. And there is another one small muscle called as teres minor. They originate in the infraspinatus fossa region and goes to upper end of the humerus. You see, all these four muscles are hugging the head of the humerus, You see, these four muscles are called as the rotator cuff muscles. In the myology, I would have discussed about the rotator cuff muscles. Okay, so these are the four small muscles that is hugging the head of the humerus with the scapula, and these four muscles only prevents the dislocation of the glenohumeral joint. So on arthrology we will discuss that separately. Okay, so this is the glenohumeral joint. And this is the four muscles, that is a subscapularis muscle, supraspinatus muscle, infraspinatus muscle and teres minor muscle. This is how the four muscles originate in the scapular region and inserts in the upper end of the humerus. Okay, so these are the important points you have to understand. Now coming to the other muscles of the scapular bone. Okay, coming to other muscles of the scapular bone. So in the medial aspect of the scapula, you have the insertion of the rhomboids major and the rhomboids minor muscle. Okay, so if you look at the muscles, and this is the insertion point for the trapezius muscle. Okay, now if you look at this interscapular muscles, Okay, these are the interscapular muscles, that is the muscles that is present between the two scapula here. Okay, the rhomboids major, the rhomboids minor, and also the levator scapulae. Okay, these are the muscles that is present in between the two scapulas. Okay, in between the two scapulas. Okay, so coming here, these are the some of the muscles that is attached, and here if you look at the trapezius muscle, it is originating in the inferior nuchal line, and then it is inserting on the scapular border here, the spine of the scapula here. Okay, so these are some of the muscles you should know about in the scapula. Okay, humerus. Okay, the humerus is an example of a long bone. The humerus is an example of long bone, and if you see the humerus, it has, see, any long bone, you have to know it has the upper end, lower end, and the shaft. Okay, so this is what you have to know about the humerus bone. So let me show you the humerus alone separately. Okay, so this is the humerus. Okay, now this is anatomical position of the humerus. What you see is the anatomical position of the humerus. This is the upper end, and this is the lower end, and this is the shaft. Okay, so when you look at the upper end of the humerus, there is head of the humerus. This is hemispherical head. Okay, a sphere means it is having 360 degree. Hemisphere means it is having only one, the half of the sphere is hemisphere. So the head is the hemispherical shape, and it is covered by the hyaline articular cartilage. Okay, so the head is followed by a neck region. This is what you have to understand. This part, what you see is anatomical neck. Let me draw with the pen and show you. So this part is the anatomical neck, and this part is the surgical neck of the humerus. Okay, so when you see here, when you see this part, so coming to the okay, this is anatomical neck, and this is the surgical neck. Okay, so this speciality of the anatomical neck is the attachment of the joint capsule. Okay, so now when you see this anatomical neck and surgical neck, this is something you have to understand about this model. Okay, now in the upper end of the humerus, there is a greater, this region is called as the greater tubercle, and this region is called as the lesser tubercle. This region is called as a greater tubercle, and this region is called as a lesser tubercle. In between this two tubercle, there is a groove. This is called as a intertubercular sulcus, or also called as a bicipital groove. The speciality of this bicipital groove is, the biceps muscle tendon is passing through this bicipital groove, and if you look at this joint capsule, okay, this is a joint capsule, this is a joint capsule. In fact, this short head of the biceps, long head of the biceps, it is passing through the bicipital groove and entering inside the joint cavity and then going to the scapula. So we will discuss this in arthrology. I don't want to confuse this. Just know the importance of the bicipital groove, and there is a transverse humeral ligament that is preventing the biceps tendon from coming out. Okay, So that's the importance of this bicipital groove of the upper end of the humerus, So coming here to the other parts, as I told you, this is the surgical neck of the humerus. The clinical importance of the surgical neck of the humerus is presence of this axillary artery and the axillary vein. Okay, so this is the circumflex humeral artery that is coiling the surgical neck of the humerus, and the axillary nerve that is coiling the surgical neck of the humerus. Okay, this is a branch of the axillary nerve that is coiling the surgical neck of the humerus. So these are the two structures that is present in the surgical neck of the humerus. So you have to take care when you are giving intramuscular injection in the deltoid region. Okay, when you are giving intramuscular injection in the deltoid region. Then coming to the shaft of the humerus. Okay, coming to the shaft of the humerus, as I told you, this shaft is having three surface, that is the medial surface, lateral surface and the posterior surface, medial, lateral and the posterior surface. Okay, and in the lateral surface there is some rough area, this rough area is called as the deltoid tuberosity. This rough area is called as a deltoid tuberosity. Okay, this rough area is called as a deltoid tuberosity, and this is the place where the deltoid muscle is inserting. You know, the deltoid muscle, the largest muscle in the shoulder region. Okay, and you can see this is the insertion of, this is a deltoid muscle, and when you look at the action of the deltoid, you see this is how the deltoid is inserting in the surgical neck of the humerus. Okay, here this is the insertion point of the, this is how the deltoid muscle is inserting in the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. Okay, and this is the insertion point of the deltoid. This is the insertion point of the deltoid, and you know the function of the deltoid is to do abduction of the shoulder. Okay, so coming here to the other part of the humerus, if you turn the humerus to the posterior side, there is a groove like structure. This groove is called as the spiral groove, where the radial nerve is passing in this spiral groove. Okay, so I will keep the nerve. This is the radial nerve that is passing in this spiral groove. So this radial nerve is supplying all the muscles of the posterior aspect of the arm and the forearm. Okay, so when this nerve is compressed in the spiral groove by supporting the hand on the window of the train or bus, so this radial nerve gets compressed and it leads to a condition called Saturday night palsy. Okay, where there is presence of wrist drop, you cannot do the extension of the wrist. Okay, so that line is called as a spiral groove of the posterior aspect of the humerus. Okay, and you know, coming to the fracture, there are a lot of fractures. Okay, let's not go deep into the applied anatomy, just focus on the okay, now if you see, coming to the lower end of the humerus, this is the anterior view and this is a posterior view. This is anterior view and this is a posterior view. Okay, so what happens, this is a medial side and this is the lateral side. Okay, so this projection in the medial side is called as a medial epicondyle. This projection in the lateral side is called as the lateral epicondyle. So this medial epicondyle is palpable in the medial aspect of the elbow, and you can feel the medial aspect of the elbow. But just in the posterior aspect of the medial epicondyle, the ulnar nerve is passing superficially. Okay, this is the ulnar nerve that is passing more superficially in the medial epicondyle, posterior aspect of the medial epicondyle. So when you sometimes when you hit the elbow in the chair or table, you feel some electric sensation because this nerve root is irritated and gives some electric shock sensation in your forearm. So that is due to irritation of this ulnar nerve in the posterior aspect of the medial epicondyle of the humerus, and this is more superficial. The nerve is present more superficial in this area. Okay, the nerve is present more superficial in this area, and moreover, okay, this is the middle epicondyle, lateral epicondyle. You can see two pit here. You can see two pit in this region. You can see two pits in this region. Okay, so this pit is called as the coronoid fossa and the radial fossa. This pit is called as the coronoid fossa and the radial fossa. Okay, so this is the radial fossa and this is the coronoid fossa. This is the coronoid fossa, and posterior aspect there is a big fossa. This fossa is called as the olecranon fossa. Okay, the olecranon process of the ulna comes and locks in this pit during the time of extension. So now let's see what happens to this fossa during the time of flexion and extension. You see, before knowing what happens, just know this part. Okay, so you know what you do is you cut this part, you divide this part into two. Okay, so you divide this part into two. Okay, so this part is called as the trochlear, and this part is called as the capitulum. Okay, this trochlear is like a shape of a pulley. Okay, a pulley means, you know, for example, this is a well and there is a wheel here. So if you want to take the water here, what happens? You have to make a rope with the bucket here. And you have to put the rope through this pulley and then take the water. Okay, now you know what is a pulley. Okay, now this is a pulley. Okay, likewise the same way this is present. That's a trochlear is present. Okay, so this is a simple understanding. So there are two parts. The trochlear part articulates with the upper end of the ulna, and the capitulum part articulates with the head of the radius. Okay, so now if you see the parts, this is medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle, coronoid fossa, radial fossa, olecranon fossa, and this is the trochlear and this is a capitulum. So now to the trochlear, the hook of ulna is so you see the upper end of the ulna is like a hook. Okay, this is like a hook. Okay, this is like a hook. So the hook of ulna is articulating with the trochlea, and the head of the radius is articulating with the capitulum here. Okay, it is articulating with the capitulum here. So this olecranon fossa locks and prevents the hyperextension of the elbow and prevents the hyperextension of the elbow. So coming here, when you look at the movements that is taking place in the elbow, when you look at the movement that is taking place in the elbow, okay, now you see how the ulna is articulating. You can see here how the ulna is articulating with the trochlea and how the head of the radius is articulating with the capitulum of the humerus. You can see how the ulna, head of the radius, is articulating with the capitulum of the humerus. During the time of extension, during the time of extension, okay, this is a complete extension. So during the time of extension, the olecranon process comes and fits the olecranon fossa and prevents hyperextension. This is flexion, when this is flexion and this is extension, isn't it? So this is flexion of the elbow and this is extension of the elbow. So the hyperextension is prevented by locking of this olecranon process on the olecranon fossa of the humerus. Okay, this is what you have to understand in this elbow articulating region. So but anyhow, we will see this separately, we will see this joint separately. You will have a better understanding. Okay, now let's go to the forearm bones. Let's go to the forearm bones, that is the ulna and the radius. Okay, coming to the ulna, ulna is also an example of a long bone. It's present in the forearm. In the forearm, if you see, both this ulna and the radius are present together. Okay, these are present together, and okay, now I will separate the ulna alone. Okay, now if you see, the upper end of the ulna is like a hook, is like a bird's beak. It's like a bird's beak. The upper end of the ulna is like a bird's beak, and if you see here, this is a beak of the ulna. Okay, this is a beak of the ulna. This part is called as the olecranon process. This projection is called as the olecranon process, and this projection is called as the coronoid process. This projection is called as the coronoid process. This pit, this surface is called as the trochlear notch. Okay, or the trochlear articulating surface. Okay, so in the lateral aspect, this is actually the anatomical position of the ulna. This is the anatomical position of the ulna. If you look at the lateral aspect of the ulna, here is the place where the head of the radius is articulating. This is the place where the head of the radius is articulating. I will show you that. So if you see here, this in the posterior aspect of the ulna, you can see a projection. This is called as a olecranon process. This is called as a olecranon process. So coming to the shaft of the ulna, you have to see, this is the lateral border. It's very sharp border, and this is a medial border. Okay, so why this lateral border is sharp? This lateral border is called as a interosseous border, because in between these two bone there is a membrane called interosseous membrane. This is called as a interosseous membrane. This membrane is attached to the interosseous border. That's why it is sharp in nature. Okay, so I will remove this, and coming to the surfaces, this is the anterior surface, this is the medial surface, and this is the posterior surface of the ulna. Okay, this is the posterior surface of the ulna. So let's not discuss about the joint. Okay, and moreover, the radius and ulna gives lot of muscles attachment, but the major muscles, the flexor muscles of the wrist, are originating in this medial epicondyle. That is, see, these are all the superficial flexor muscles of the forearm. They are originating in the medial epicondyle. Likewise, the extensor muscles of the forearm, superficial extensor muscles of the forearm, are originating in the lateral epicondyle, of the humerus. Okay, these are the common place where the flexor muscles originate in the medial epicondyle and the extensor muscle originates in the lateral epicondyle. But the superficial muscles that are present on the forearm, the deep muscles that are present on the forearm are originating in the radius and ulna, and it is coming to the fingers. So coming to this, the interosseous membrane also gives place for origin of this for deep group muscles. Okay, so in myology I will teach you separately about the muscles of the forearm, so that it will be very easy to understand that mechanism. Okay, so these are all the various, the red point shows various origin, and this is the insertion of the brachialis muscle, and this is the insertion of the biceps muscle. Okay, so these are coming to lower end of the ulna. Coming to the lower end of the ulna, you see the lower end of the ulna is called as is having the head. This is the head of the ulna. And this small projection in the medial side is called as the ulnar styloid process. Okay, it gives attachment for the collateral ligaments of the wrist, so we will see that separately. This is called as the ulnar styloid process. Okay, this is the head of the ulna, this is the ulnar styloid process. So you know what, this ulna head is not having any relationship with the carpal bones. Okay, but the radius, lower end of the radius, is having good relationship with the carpal bones. Why? This relationship is prevented by presence of disc. There is a disc that is present in between these two bones. Okay, this disc prevents the relationship between the ulna and the carpal bones. That's why ulna is not a part of wrist joint. Okay, it is present in the wrist, it's taking a part, but it is not having any relationship with the carpal bone, because this fibrocartilaginous disc is preventing the relationship between this carpal bones and the head of the ulna. Okay, so this is the various parts of the ulna you should know. This is the ulnar styloid process. This is the head of the ulna, and this head of the ulna is articulating with the radius, forming the inferior radio-ulnar joint. This is radius, this is ulna, and this is inferior aspect. Okay, so inferior radio-ulnar joint. Likewise, here in the upper aspect, this radius is articulating with the ulna. So this joint is called as superior radio-ulnar joint. So superior radio-ulnar joint and inferior radio-ulnar joint. So what happens, the pronation and supination movement is taking place in this joint only. So okay, so I will discuss that in the arthrology. Okay, so that's a separate topic I want to give a presentation. So let's not confuse between the joints and the bones now. Okay, just know the name of the joint, remaining thing we will discuss. Okay, now coming to the radius, coming to the upper end of the radius bone. This radius is also a long bone. Okay, so this part is called as the head of the radius, which is cylindrical in shape. The head of the radius is, I will remove the ulna. Yeah, the head of the radius is cylindrical in shape. Okay, and you can see it is concave surface. The upper end of the radius is having the concave surface, and it is having the cylindrical shape, and this area is the neck of the radius. This area is the neck of the radius. This neck of the radius is continuing as a radial tuberosity. Okay, is continuing as a radial tuberosity. So to this radial tuberosity, the biceps muscle is attached. This is the biceps muscle. This is the biceps muscle. Okay, you see, when this muscle contracts, okay, the biceps muscle tendon is pulling the radial tuberosity so that it is supinating. See, always giving is a pronation movement, taking is a supination movement, okay, which is 90-degree range of motion. Okay, so when this biceps muscle contracts, this attachment pulls the radial tuberosity and causes supination. That's why biceps is called as powerful supinator. Biceps is called as a powerful supinator, that we will discuss in the joints. So know that the biceps muscle is attached to this radial tuberosity and it is helpful for flexion as well as the supination. Okay, now coming to the lower end of the radius, okay, shaft of the radius, the medial border of the radius is sharp, and that is called as a interosseous border. That is called as a interosseous border, like this interosseous membrane that is attaching both the bones, okay, and also giving a place for muscle origin. This border is called as a interosseous border. This border is called as interosseous border. Okay, coming to the lower end of the radius, so if you look at the inferior surface, there is one you divide this area into two. Okay, you divide this area into two. One area is quadrangular surface and other area is triangular surface. Okay, in fact the lower end of the radius is broad. Okay, and laterally this projection is called as radial styloid process. So in the ulna you have this ulnar styloid process, and in the radius you have the radial styloid process. Only this base of the radius is articulating with the carpal bones, forming the radiocarpal joint. Okay, so there is no relationship between the ulna and the carpal bones. I showed you why. Okay, and this pit is called as the ulnar notch, where the head of the ulna is articulating and forming the inferior radioulnar joint. Okay, in fact this anterior surface of the radius is smooth, whereas the posterior surface is having lot of rough edges. Okay, the posterior surface of the radius is having lots of rough edges because the extensor tendons are passing on the rough surfaces, and it is, you see, and thereby the posterior surface is rough, whereas in the anterior aspect, the canal is formed and there is a muscle called as pronator quadratus, and that is preventing the rubbing of this flexor tendons on the radius. That's why the anterior surface of the lower end of the radius is smooth, whereas the posterior surface of the lower end of the radius is having a very rough edges. Okay, so coming here, so these are all the various parts of the radius that you should know. Now we will go to the carpal bones. There are 8 carpal bones that is arranged in 2 rows. Okay, so one row is the proximal row and other row is the distal row. One row is the proximal row and other row is the distal row. So this is the proximal row and the distal row. Okay, so if you look here, there are 8 carpal bones, that is a scaphoid, lunate, this is a scaphoid, this is a scaphoid, this is a lunate, and this is a lunate bone, and this is a triquetral bone, and this is a pisiform bone. Okay, then the distal row is trapezium, trapezoid, captate, and hamate. Okay, so this is one proximal row and this is a distal row. Okay, so let me write down. This is the scaphoid, lunate, triquetral, pisiform, trapezium, trapezoid, captate, hamate. Okay, trapezium, trapezoid, and captate, hamate. So this is the proximal row and this is the distal row. Okay, and these are all the metacarpals. Okay, let's discuss only about the carpal bones now. Let's discuss only about the carpal bones now. If you see in the proximal row, the scaphoid and the lunate bone alone is articulating with the radius, forming the radio. So joint we will discuss later. Just know the names. Okay, just know the names. See, the scaphoid is like a shape of a boat. You see, I am going to have a boat here. You see. Okay, this is the shape of the boat. Okay, now boat shape came. So this is the shape of a boat, that's why it is called as the scaphoid bone. Okay, then lunate bone, it is shape of a half moon. You see, this is like a moon. You see, lunar, so lunate. Okay, so these are all the small bones in the wrist. Then triquetrum, it has triangular shape. Okay, see, 1 2 3 surface, so that's why it's called as a triquetral bone. Then the pisiform is like a shape of a peanut. The pisiform is like a shape of a peanut. Okay, actually this is an example of a sesamoid bone. This bone is enclosed in the tendon of the flexor carpi ulnaris. I will show you. You see, sesamoid bone. Sesamoid bone means any bone that is placed inside the tendon of the muscle, isn't it? So this is a flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. This tendon is swallowing the pisiform bone. This tendon is swallowing the pisiform bone. That's like quadriceps muscle in the knee swallowing the patella. Likewise, this flexor carpi ulnaris muscle is swallowing the pisiform bone. The flexor carpi ulnaris muscle is swallowing the pisiform bone. Okay, so that's why it's an example of a sesamoid bone. Then these are the proximal row, that is scaphoid, lunate, triquetral, pisiform. Then the distal row, trapezium, having 4 surfaces. See, like a trapezium, like having 4 surface, 1 2 3 4. Okay, then trapezoid, this bone is also having 4 surface. Okay, then captate, this is a captate bone. Okay, and this is a hamate bone. Okay, this is a hamate bone. And the speciality is the hamate is having a hook. You see, this projection is called as a hook of the hamate. Underneath, the neurovascular structures are passing. I will show you. See, this ulnar artery and the ulnar nerve. Okay, ulnar nerve. Okay, this artery and the nerve is passing through the hook of hamate. Okay, so it is not mentioned clearly. So if you look at the Okay, you see this flexor digitorum profundus muscle tendon is also passing through the hook of Hammett. Okay, one I want to show you this aponeurosis. Okay, this is the aponeurosis of the flexor sheath. Okay, so what happens, this is the hook, this is the hook of the Hammett, and this is aponeurosis, and this is the aponeurosis. Okay, sorry, this is the palmar aponeurosis, this is the tenosynovium, this is the tenosynovium. So what happens here, when a person falls with the outstretched hand and lands on the hook of Hammett, this small hook breaks and escape between this tenosynovium and the palmar aponeurosis. See, this is a palmar aponeurosis. So then what happens, so this fragment will be roaming here or somewhere else. Okay, so and it will be causing severe amount of pain continuously, so it's very difficult to find even with the radiographic findings. Okay, so that is the speciality of the hook of Hammett, that is the speciality of the hook of Hammett, you have to understand here. Okay, so now you see, this is the radius bone, this is the carpal bone, so this line is called as the radiocarpal bone. This line is called as the, so this line is called as the radiocarpal joint line. Okay, this is one row of carpal bone, this is another row of carpal bone, so this line is called as the intercarpal joint line. Okay, intercarpal joint line. So this is the metacarpal bones, 1 2 3 4 5 metacarpals, and these are the distal row of the column. So this is carpo-metacarpal joint line. So this is carpo-metacarpal joint line. Okay, so what you, so this is the joint lines, radiocarpal joint lines, intercarpal joint lines, and carpo-metacarpal joint line, carpo-metacarpal joint line. So if you see here, okay, now what you see here, okay, now can you see a tunnel? Yeah, what you see here is a tunnel. This tunnel is called as a carpal tunnel. This tunnel is called as the carpal tunnel. This tunnel is called as a carpal tunnel. Now I will, if you see, all the muscles are passing through this tunnel except the palmar aponeurosis and one single muscle. I will show you. All these muscles are passing through this tunnel. So this is the transverse carpal ligament that is present on the superior surface between these carpal bones, and this carpal, transverse carpal ligament and the carpal bones concave arrangement is forming this tunnel. Okay, one important clinical aspect is this median nerve. Is this median nerve? So this is a median nerve that is passing through this tunnel. This is a median nerve that is passing through this tunnel, and this median nerve gets compressed when there is more encroachment of fatty tissues, or when the person is supporting the wrist and keep typing, then it can lead to compression of the median nerve. So when the median nerve is compressed, there is radiating pain in the first 3.5 finger. So the pain, that's called as a carpal tunnel syndrome. That is called as carpal tunnel syndrome. That is called as a carpal tunnel syndrome. So let me cut this area. That is called as a carpal tunnel syndrome. Okay. Okay, what you see here is, these are the carpal bones, this is the transverse carpal ligament, these are the carpal bones. Okay, cut, and inside the carpal bone, these are the tendons that is passing, and the median nerve, that also I cut this. median nerve. Okay, so this nerve gets compressed in the carpal tunnel when there is more tissue engagement. Okay, so one thing you have to understand here is all the deep group muscles are passing through the tunnel. All the that is coming to the fingers, all the tendons that we will discuss that separately in myology, are passing through this tunnel except one single. This is the palmaris longus muscle. This is the palmaris longus muscle. Okay, and this palmaris longus muscle comes superficial and turns as a palmar aponeurosis Okay, this palmaris longus muscle comes and turns as a palmar aponeurosis. Okay, so that this aponeurosis, it gives stability for the flexor deitorum tendons. Okay, only this muscle is coming superficially in the superficial aspect of this transverse carpal ligament. So this is the that we will discuss in the wrist joint. Okay, just now give the importance in how the carpal bones are arranged and it is forming the carpal tunnel. Okay, and it is forming the carpal tunnel. Then coming to the metacarpal, there are 5 metacarpal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so take this metacarpal. It has head and it's a base. Base is articulating with the carpal bone, that's a proximal end. The head, that's a distal end, is articulating with the phalanges. Okay, distal end is articulating with the phalanges. So this is the first metacarpal, second metacarpal, third, fourth, and the fifth metacarpal. Okay, so what you see here is this is the shaft of the metacarpal, this is the base of the metacarpal, and this is the head of the metacarpal. Base, shaft, and the head. So all the metacarpals are having the same parts. Okay, in between this metacarpal you have the palmar, the interosseous muscles. See, these are the interosseous muscle. And this muscle is attached between this shaft of the metacarpal and to the phalanges. Okay, also this lumbrical muscles is present. This is a flexor deitorum tendon, and these are the lumbrical muscles. I will show you. Yeah. Okay, these are the lumbrical muscles. Okay, that's attached between the tendon to give stability for the tendon. Okay, let's not go into the muscular system. Okay, and as far as phalanges is concerned, there are 14 phalanges. In the thumb you have 2 phalanges. In remaining fingers you have 3 phalanges. Okay, remaining fingers you have 3 phalanges. Okay, so in the thumb, any phalanges towards the body is proximal, any phalange away from the body is distal. So this is distal phalanx, this is distal, and distal, whereas this is proximal phalanx, proximal, and proximal. And there are 4 middle phalanx. Okay, so this is thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, and the little finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so this is the metacarpophalangeal, first metacarpophalangeal joint, second metacarpophalangeal joint. Okay, third metacarpophalangeal joint, fourth metacarpophalangeal joint, fifth metacarpophalangeal joint. So this is proximal interphalangeal joint. Okay, and this is the distal interphalangeal joint. This is the distal interphalangeal joint. Okay, so this is how you have to understand. Okay, when you come to muscles attached to this place, it's very interesting, how the finger movements are present. All these are very interesting. We will discuss that separately. Okay, by this we are completing the osteology part of the upper limb.